right, we're on to our third section and we're talking about emergency procedures. So this is our 10th topic, and emergency procedures. This slide is from the bottom of page 136 and review in the textbook page 136 to 141. Towing, you can either ask for a tow from a friend, or there are, of course, paid towing services. That gets very expensive, and so be careful with that. This is just showing you kind of a typical setup where you want a bridle of the boat towing and a bridle off the bow of the vessel being towed. And you want to limit your speed to less than whatever the slowest boat's hull speed is. So make sure you're not towing too fast, and try to have the tow line long enough so that you're in step with the waves. That's important. Our next procedure is dragging anchor. Your anchor is dragging along the bottom. You can see the boat moving. What are you going to do? The first thing to do seems counterintuitive. It's let out more scope. That's getting you closer to the beach behind you, all right? But if you have room, let out more scope and see if the anchor will dig in. Remember, the key is parallel pull. The rod is pulling on the anchor parallel to the bottom, digging the flukes in. It's when you have a slight upward pull that then the anchor just gets ripped off the bottom. Obviously, if letting out more scope doesn't work, you're going to need to pull up the anchor and reset it. But the key to making sure you don't drag is you have followed rules that we've talked about as far as having proper chain and also having proper scope. Running aground, this is not a good thing, all right? Now, there are some areas of the country, Chesapeake Bay comes to mind, that's very shallow and muddy, and people are bouncing off the bottom all the time, very gently. And I remember one of my past instructors, and he used to race in the Chesapeake Bay, and their motto was 2 bumps and then we better tack. So, but around here, if you hit something, you're probably hitting a rock. So if you do go aground, you want to look at the following factors. What is the wind doing? Do you have a weather shore or a lee shore? A lee shore is when the wind is pushing you further onto the shore. That would be bad. Is it flat calm, or do you have large waves pushing you onto this shoal or reef? Bottom condition, what have you hit? Is it sand or mud? Okay, probably the only thing damaged there is your ego. But have you hit rock or coral or something? That's obviously a totally different scenario. And then what's the tide doing? Is the tide coming up or going off? If you're in no immediate danger and the tide is coming in, especially in our area where we have such a large tidal range, maybe just wait and let the tide float you off. Now, if you need to get off right away, the first thing to do is try to back off with your engine. Your rudder is the most vulnerable. Protect your rudder. Don't swing the boat around where the rudder could be damaged. Heeling the boat is also another thing you can do, because as you heel the boat, the draft is less. The third thing is kedging. Kedging is when you get an anchor out to seaward, either by dinging it out or having another boat take an anchor out, and then you winch your boat up to the anchor, trying to get the boat off of the shoal. Accepting a tow is another possibility. Make sure they're not going to damage the boat, and make sure you give them some compensation. There have been rare cases. Most boaters are certainly willing to help, but there have been rare cases where after pulling a boat off the rocks, the boat that towed them sued to the boat as salvage and actually won and was awarded the boat. So you just want to be careful of that. Springing a leak. In the first place, if you spring a leak, in most cases, you are not in dire danger. If you ever turn your water hose on and you see the water coming up in a maybe this far, that's kind of the amount of water coming in most cases when you spring a leak. So be calm, don't panic. Now, first of all, what you want to do is locate the source. Now, the worst case scenario is if you've hit something and been holed. Obviously, you would know that, and that's a whole different situation, and that is serious, and you could have the water coming in at a way faster rate. But in most cases, that isn't what's happened. So another possible source is you have, on fiberglass boats, you have a fiberglass tube that the rudder goes through. If that cracks down at the hull connection, then water can come in. And what you would want to do in that case is get any load off of the rudder. So if you're sailing and you have weather helm, you want to drop your sails. And a good thing to do is bring a tube of underwater epoxy, which you would goop up around there, and it can set up even if it's wet. This list I have is from the most improbable to the most common problem. Next is the packing gland. The packing gland is how you solve the engineering problem of the rudder post going through the hull under the water. The propeller's got to be able to turn, but you don't want it leaking. And you either have a packing gland or a dripless shaft seal. And so you look there to see if you have any water coming in at that point. Another possibility is you have the water pump on and you've blown a freshwater hose and you're pumping all your fresh water into the bilge. One thing you can normally do is never taste the water. I've done that and gotten sick before in the bilge, but smell it. And you can definitely tell the difference between fresh water in your bilge and seawater in your bilge. The most common problem is a hose has blown on a through hull that's under the water. If you have the bottom of the boat here and you have a hose going through a through hull, all right, up to say the sink drain, the water in the hose will go up to the level of the water outside, all right? And so if the hose breaks below that, you are going to have water coming in. What's the solution? Close the through hull and then replace the hose. Now, if the seacock fails when you try to close it, then you should have wood plugs nearby, and you take the hose off and you take the wood plug and with a hammer, just soft little knock into the through hull to stop the water from leaking, and then you're going to not be able to fix that until you haul the boat out of the water. But if the hose breaks, close the through hull and then you can just replace the hose. I close all my through hulls when I'm off the boat. Don't, trust a $10 hunk of hose. Don't trust your boat to that. So close your through hulls when you leave your boat, when you're not on. Steering failure. If you have a tiller, you would need a second emergency tiller to put on there if you break the tiller. If your wheel steering fails, you have an emergency tiller that goes on to the rudder post that you can steer until you make repairs. Now, either you have a cable and a quadrant system in which maybe a cable has broke or it has jumped the sheave, or you could have a hydraulic system and then maybe you've lost hydraulic fluid and the hose has failed. Steer with the emergency tiller. And I was on a situation where we were sailing from Lahaina on an offshore class back to the west coast to Seattle, and within the first 5 hours we lost our steering and had to steer with an emergency tiller all the way back to Honolulu down the Molokai Channel so we could make repairs. Fouled prop is the next one on our list. This is the most common problem you will see that boaters get into, and it's certainly preventable. I'm one of the few sailors, I think, that can say I've sailed a lot of years and a lot of miles and never fouled a line in my prop. Most boaters can't say that. So you want to do due diligence. Now what happens is if you get a line in your propeller, it'll bind it up and it'll shut the motor off. And unless by some miracle you can rotate the shaft and unwind it, you're going to have to dive in the water with a knife and cut the line free from your prop. You cannot use your engine until you do that. The most common source of fouling a line in a prop is towing a dinghy. And so when you are maneuvering, you're leaving the dock, you're coming into a dock, you're anchoring, anything like that, make sure your dinghy is uptight, tied opposite to where your exhaust water is coming out, so you don't have a 180-degree seawater hot tub after you arrive. And because when you're at speed, you want the dinghy out there quite a ways. And but that's the number one thing. The dinghy's behind you, you've forgotten about it, and then you are anchoring and you put the motor in reverse and all of a sudden the motor dies and you look behind you, oops, fouled the dinghy line. Also be careful when you're anchoring, make sure you look at how other boats are laying. Sometimes boats, well, most cases boats are laying to the wind if they're on a single anchor, but often the current is stronger than the wind and they're laying to the current. So if you drop the anchor and you're guessed there and the boat swings over and the engine is running and now you foul your anchor line in your prop. That's another thing. The third is running rigging. Anytime I start a motor, make sure you're in neutral, start the motor, look over the side. Do we have exhaust water coming out, number one? And number two, are there any lines over the side before we put it into gear? All right, so a halyard is falling over the side or a sheet or something like that. So be careful with those things. This is the number one problem that boaters have. The next thing is rigging or mast failure. Again, this is going to be a very uncommon kind of a problem, but if all of a sudden you break a shroud, immediately tack, put the load on the other side. The next thing you would do is take spare halyards and tie it off on the side where the shroud broke and then drop your sails. Now, if you break a headstay, the mast is going to want to fall backwards. So you want to turn to a run immediately and have the mainsail push the mast forward. Then again, use spare halyards and drop your sails. If you lose a backstay, sheet the main in tight, and the tension on the leech and the main sheet will keep the mast from falling forward. Then again, spare halyards to stabilize the mast, and then drop your sails and motor in. You have on board fire extinguishers, and a type A fire extinguisher will put out a type A fire, which is wood or paper. B is gas, oil, or grease, so a galley fire or an engine fire. And C is electrical. Now, the Coast Guard only requires that you carry type B fire extinguishers, but a smart boater is going to have an ABC combination fire extinguisher on the boat. And people on the boat should know where the fire extinguishers are and how to use them. Keep in mind the fire triangle: heat, oxygen, and fuel. If you eliminate one of them, for instance oxygen, it puts out the fire. For instance, an engine fire, always don't open the engine compartment up. Instead, use the little plastic hole and you stick your hose in there and spray in there, not introducing any oxygen to the fire. Okay, now you know, on cruising boats, typically you can see, you know, again, an engine fire or a galley fire. Though with diesel engines, you know, that's an engine fire is very uncommon. Propane is another source of potentially fire, and if you ever smell propane, shut off your propane system. Now the next subject is our 11th topic, person overboard. And you've had some exposure to this in the 101 class. On the 101 class, page 107, we have the diagram of the figure 8. And what I want to do first is explain to you, since I've been teaching a long time, I can explain to you sort of the history of person overboard techniques and where they came from. And I've got to say, personally, I hate the word man overboard. I find it very sexist, and I use crew overboard or person overboard. But some people are just not sensitive to that. But anyway, now, back in the 60s, some dinghy sailors came up with a technique called the beam reach method. Now understand, when somebody goes overboard, you only have two problems. Problem one is getting back to the person where they are in the water. And problem two is getting them back on board. Those are your two issues. And so what you want to do when somebody goes overboard is you want to sail what's called a reciprocal course. Reciprocal means you go 180 degrees back from where you came from. And so these dinghy sailors, they didn't have a compass, you know, there was no GPS back then. All they had was their wind indicators. So the theory became, if somebody were to fall overboard, turn to a beam reach from whatever point of sail you're on, sail a beam reach for 3 or 4 boat lengths, tack through the wind, don't jibe, go back on a beam reach. And if the spotter, of course you should always appoint a spotter, throw the Type 4, and alert the crew. If the spotter loses sight of them, they're going to be right off the bow. You have an area, concentrated area of where to look for them, because you are retracing your steps to get back to the person. Then as you come alongside, you luff first the jib, then the main, pick them up on the leeward side. And I taught that as a young college student, teaching sailing, and we called it the beam reach method. Now ASA came along in the 80s and said, well, that's a great technique. However, there are modern day boats that are fractional rig, where the headstay only goes a fraction of the way to the top, and the shrouds and the spreaders are swept aft, so that when you go back on a beam reach, the boom will hit the shrouds and the main won't luff, and you'll have too much speed approaching the person in the water. So ASA wanted a technique that was universal, that would work on all boats. So they modified the beam reach method, and that's where the figure 8 came from. What you do is somebody goes overboard, you alert the crew, throw the Type 4, appoint a spotter, turn to a beam reach. And I teach new instructors for ASA, and I certify them to teach ASA classes, and I ask them during the clinic, why do you go to a beam reach on the figure 8? And none of them know the real answer. The answer is, you're trying to retrace your steps and sail a reciprocal course, and the beam reach is using the wind as a reference point to retrace your steps. Okay, so you go to the beam reach, you sail your 3 or 4 boat lengths, you tack as quickly as you can, come about, don't jibe. Now, at this point, if the spotter's lost them, just go back on a beam reach and luff the sails as best you can. But if the spotter still has them in sight, you go to a broad reach, and then you turn and approach on a close reach. Now, what can you do on a close reach that you might not be able to do on a beam reach? Luff your mainsail. Your jib you can luff on any point of sail, but here you can also luff the mainsail, and then you pick them up on the leeward side. And a good rule of thumb is as you're going on that broad reach, when the person is to windward of you and a beam, that's the time to make the turn, and you'll most likely be on a close reach approach, which you want. So I use the little acronym BCBC. So beam reach, after 4 boat lengths, come about, broad reach, and then close reach approach, BCBC. All right, so that was the figure 8. Then in the early 2000s, the Coast Guard and the U.S. Naval Academy did all kinds of studies to find out which of these techniques worked and which didn't work. And they came up with what's called quick stop techniques. Quick stop techniques are great. They only work with modern day boats that can turn in a very tight radius, okay, which most modern day boats do. But then, like 2015, somewhere around there, there was another symposium like they had with the Naval Academy and the Coast Guard, and they studied techniques again, and there was some pushback at that point on the figure 8 that it was too complicated for beginning sailors. And they came up with a technique called the broad reach, close reach. So they said, let's try to cut out some of these steps on the figure 8. And so their technique is somebody goes overboard, go to a broad reach, sail 3 or 4 boat lengths, tack, don't jibe, and now you're approaching back on a close reach, and again pick them up on your leeward side. All right, so instead of 4 steps, it's 3 steps. So turn to a broad reach, come about, and then close reach approach. One less step than the figure 8. The advantages is you have one less step. The disadvantages is when you're going back, if the spotter loses them, the close reach is a way wider range than a beam reach, which is a very exact point. All right, but that's the broad reach, close reach. And what we're going to do in year 103 on the water is get to practice these different techniques. Now, how does the quick stop work? The quick stop is again for boats that, handle very well. It is over the years of teaching all these different techniques, it is now my maneuver of choice, especially if you're short-handed. Say husband and wife are out sailing and one of them goes overboard. You've only got one person. You don't have a lot, of people to manage the sheets, to be a spotter, to do all this. The beauty of the quick stop, or the theory, is all the studies they did with the Coast Guard and the Naval Academy, their number one result was the closer you stay to the person, the better chance you have of finding them. Brilliant. So that is the beauty of the quick stop. Now, it works the best if you're sailing downwind and somebody goes overboard. All you do is know which side is windward. Turn the bow to windward as hard and as fast as you can. That sharp turn kills your speed. You're within 1 boat length at all times, and then you pick them up on your leeward side. Okay? Just a sharp turn. Now, it gets a little more complicated if you're sailing upwind when somebody goes overboard. Because now what you have to do is a sharp turn, you have to fall off and jibe. With either of these techniques, my suggestion is do not touch the sheets. So with the downwind, as you come about sharply, the jib will back and you'll sort of like hove to right next to the person. The only time you would touch the sheet is if the jib is pulling you to leeward of the person, then you want to just pop the jib sheet. Other than that, you don't touch any sheets. And that's a call you make as you come near the person. Downwind, your sails are in tight because you're sailing upwind. You don't touch the sheets. It's a sharp turn. So in 30 knots of wind, this could become very hairy. And so you got to be careful. Jibing, because obviously you're more out of control jibing, and you're not luffing as you go through the tack. The wind is full on one side and now it's full on the other side, which really could spin the boat out of control. So be careful. But you spin around, don't touch the sheets, and again, right alongside the person. Then once you're alongside, you grab a hold of them, then you're talking about the second problem, which is getting them back on board. And if they're fine, and I want to say, many times they haven't been hit on the head with the boom. It's not like they're unconscious in the water. They're conscious, they're fine, but they could start getting hypothermic to the point that they can't climb up a swim ladder. But that's the first option. Try to see if they can climb up the swim ladder. And if they can't, then you might need to go to what's called the life sling. So again, this quick stop is going to really work the best with a short-handed crew. Okay, so the life sling is a device. It's an overboard rescue collar attached to 100 feet of line, all right, that is attached to the boat. So when somebody goes overboard, you throw in the Type 4, you throw the life sling in the water. Once they contact that, then you are connected to that person, and now you want to stop all forward momentum. You could either hove to or you could drop your sails, but don't drag them through the water. When we talk about person overboard, keep in mind the 50-50 rule. If you fall into 50-degree water after 50 minutes of immersion, your chances of survival due to hypothermia are down to 50-50. So it gets a little, you want to work fast and get the person out of the water as soon as possible. With the life sling, they developed their own quick stop procedure, which is sort of circling the person like a water skier being circled by a ski boat until they touch the line. I'm not a big fan of that. I say use your techniques. We've talked about the quick stop. We've talked about, the broad reach, close reach. We've talked about the figure eight. Use those techniques. But then once the person has the line, the beauty of the quick stop is the ability to get them out of the water. But in calm water, you could circle until they grab the line. But in really bad conditions, I'm not a fan of this part of the life sling technique. I had a 104 class sailing up in Puget Sound, and we were practicing these different person overboard techniques. And then we went into our night anchorage, anchored the boat, and one of the students came to me, and this was a guy who was like 6'7", like 350 pounds. He was a very large man. And he was married to a woman who was like 5'2", I of course didn't ask her weight, but I would say 100 pounds dripping wet. I mean, she was very small. And he says, well, none of this means anything to me, because if I go overboard and I can't climb up the swim ladder, there's no way she's getting me out. I said, oh yeah, let's test that technique. And he laid on the deck, and we had her rig up the life sling all anyone did. You know, I was coaching, but no one else did anything. And she hoisted him up off the deck, hung him like a trophy fish. We all took pictures, and then she let him back down on the deck. And he was so excited about it. He goes, wow, with this life sling, she could get me out of the water. That was revolutionary for him. So here's how it works. What you're using is a block and tackle system, and you're using the power of your Genoa winch. And on that boat, we had a 45-footer. We had a 2-speed, you know, big, huge winch. So what you do is, as you have the line, they're connected to the boat, you stop the boat. You pull them in and you pull them tight to the hull, make sure their head's out of the water, and cleat the line down. Now you've got to rig the system. You want a 3 or 4 part block and tackle, and on Passion we use a block and tackle that we use for the life sling and as our preventer line. That's all we ever use it for, and it's right in the cockpit ready to go. What you would do is hook one end of the block and tackle to the ring of the life sling. It's like a horseshoe rescue collar. The other end that has the free line, you take to a halyard, main halyard, Genoa halyard, doesn't matter, anything that's available, hook it to the halyard and hoist it maybe 10 feet up and cleat off the halyard. Now the free end of the block and tackle, as you can see on the diagram, goes through your Genoa block and then to your Genoa winch. And feel free to move the block to what's the appropriate spot. Now, with a 4-to-1 block and tackle and the power of a 2-speed winch, she was able to crank him right up on deck and over the lifeline. So this is the beauty of the life sling, is the ability for a light person to be able to get aboard a person who can't climb up the swim ladder, who's way larger and heavier. You're not just going to bear hug them and pull them out of the water. It's just not going to happen. So this is the beauty of the life sling. Our 12th subject is hypothermia, and you can read about this on page 148 and 149 in the textbook. Hypothermia, of course, is where your body core temperature starts dropping below normal, 98.6 or whatever is normal for you. Mild hypothermia, shivering, slurred speech. All you need to do is wrap them in a blanket, get them out of the cold, they'll be fine. Moderate hypothermia, the symptoms are their muscles become rigid. And if they get to moderate hypothermia, they might not be able to grip to climb up a swim ladder. And this is important to realize. Could be they're drowsy or incoherent. They don't have enough internal body heat and they need an external heat source to reheat them. All right, so gradually reheat with an external source. And usually, body heat on body heat, once you get them out of the cold and wet, is the key. Severe hypothermia, they're unconscious. So now we're talking very serious. Do what you would do for moderate hypothermia and immediately get on the VHF or on your cell phone and call for help. There's 5 no-nos of hypothermia. First, don't give them any hot beverages, no massaging their hands and their feet, no caffeine, no alcohol, no hot shower. Any of these can reheat the body too quickly, could cause cardiac arrest. But there's one thing that we that sail in cold water need to understand, that most people never get to severe hypothermia that are fatalities because of what's called cold water drowning. When someone falls into very cold water, the natural tendency is like this. And so in the first place, if you fall into cold water, hold your breath till you pop up. All right? Because you could drown just like that from swallowing too much cold water because you're inhaling and your mouth is open. The second thing is if you're not wearing a PFD, you are putting your life in danger. Cold water drowning, after you get to moderate hypothermia, and that can take minutes, you start losing control of your muscles and you can't tread water and float on the surface. That's why when you're sailing in cold water, it is so important to wear a PFD. So what happens is they start losing the ability to swim or to tread water, and they sink. They never make it to severe hypothermia. So always wear a PFD. Hypothermia is a danger, but cold water drowning is even more of a danger. And you've heard, I'm sure, of stories, people that were good swimmers that drowned falling into cold water. And that's what happened to them. Very, very sad. So always wear a PFD when you sail, especially in cold water. It's very, very important. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this has been helpful. Use it in conjunction with the textbook. And, you know, once you've signed up for a class, your class starts. So feel free to call your instructor or to call the office if you have questions. All right, thanks so much and enjoy your time out on the water at Puget Sound Sailing Institute.